My name is Jason.
My name is Tom.
And this is Fear of a Black Dragon, an old school RPG podcast.
And in this episode, we're not in Kansas anymore. Confusingly, we're in Missouri, because this is Bad Kansas City.
Our first segment is the basic crawl. Bad Kansas City is a 154-page OSR campaign setting written and designed by Sean McAnally. It starts with a quasi-historical note that is a federal grand jury excerpt talking about some of the incidents as of late in Kansas City, and then it swings right into the intro. This is directly from the book. The Kansas City of this book is not the real one. Like any good fantasy city, this one is filled with sorcerers, demons, magical items, and other genre tropes. It's based on reality, however. In the 1930s, Kansas City was in the grip of the so-called Pendergast machine, ruled over by political boss Tom Pendergast. In our volume, Pendergast is a demon, and is thus transmogrified into Pendergeist for purposes of this campaign. The book has two major sections. The first presents a hex map of part of 1930s Kansas City, followed by a list of keyed encounters for each hex. Many of these encounters lead to others. Although the campaign is presented in a hex crawl format, it is unlikely the PCs will simply wander from hex to hex. Think of it more as a framework that contains and provides channels for multiple storylines. The second part of the book contains a weird history of Kansas City that is one part fact, one part local folklore, and one part completely made up. Finally, the book contains some rule suggestions and useful play aids. Let's get into the actual details, though, Tom.
Indeed. The meat of it begins, as is traditional for any OSR book, with a rumours table of surprisingly directly tying into actually useful stuff, I will say, in an early bit of review. Then we get general background telling you about the mayor and the police force and all the different groups and corruption that's going on. Then there is a list of story threads, which is pretty prosaic but very handy table, telling you in which hexes different storylines are to be encountered, because, as mentioned in that intro, things do connect to one another throughout the book. After that is a list of multi-page hexes. So this is where the author is pulling out the big locations, which include Pendergeist headquarters. I think there's the police headquarters, a hotel, an asylum with a scary serial killer labyrinth underneath it. And these, unlike the majority of the hex write-ups, take up more than one page. And so that's the reason they are highlighted for your elucidation, so you can read them first, basically. Then there's also a list of locations of the pages of the Lesser Key of Solomon, which is a guide to an important book of demonology that plays into a lot of stories in this scenario. And there's a sort of essentially ongoing fetch quest to get more pages of this book to arm yourself, magically speaking. And then there's a gamble as to how much time you should spend doing that instead of getting on with fighting the demons. There's a list of sorcerers, there's a list of demons, there's a list of monsters. And then crucially, there's the campaign hex map and the encounter descriptions that follow it. This takes up pages 16 to 110. So the multi-page write-ups are the stockyards, the airport, the cathedral, the park, a hotel owned by the main villain, the railway station, police headquarters, the jazz district, that's a euphemism for where the black people live, a sinister asylum, the boss dungeon of the mayor's headquarters, which also contains some weird alternate dimensional spaces. Then we get into the second half mentioned in the intro with a weird timeline of Kansas City, a section about demons, a section about modern weapons, which is Tommy guns and stuff, a section on vehicles and chase rules, places to stay, shop and eat, the cost of living, buying weapons, 1930s pop culture, random magic items, it is an OSR book, welcome to the machine, the rather upsetting list of jobs for PCs who decide to join the bad guys, and then a whole bunch of random Kansas Cityans with gangster names and normal people names in a table. Let's talk about bona fides. Jason, you've just read this one, I think?
I have just read this one.
Okay, I ran this as a 5-session open table mini campaign using Dungeon Crawl Classics, which we will discuss later on.
Fantastic. Things we liked. Now, I am going to gather from our respective notes, Tom, that you enjoyed this considerably more than me. And I do want to give this a fair shake. I want to caveat my comments a little bit by saying that I do think there are some things that are negative about this that I want to address, but I also think you should take my comments, and maybe Sean, in this sense. One, I don't think this is really to my taste, and I think that has probably colored my thoughts and opinions on it. There are some things about this that are just not my thing. And two, and perhaps more importantly, I do think that a lot of the issues I have flagged while reading it probably aren't that big of a deal in play, which is why I think our format is really important. Like we won't talk about a module unless at least one of us has played it. And this is one of those instances where I can readily admit that if I played this, I would probably have different feelings about it. Things that come off a certain way in the page or the density of certain aspects of this module probably in play are not that big of a deal.
Sure thing.
Does that make sense?
So it sure does.
I just want to kind of throw that out there.
Yeah, that's fine. Although, before we get started on that, when you say this is not your thing, what's the kind of thing that isn't yours?
Yeah, okay. I've been thinking about this a lot. I like urban fantasy, and I like historical settings that have been made fantasy.
Yeah.
What I don't like is when that fantasy is super upfront and obvious. So I like it when the fantasy elements are secret in the setting, or they are not as generally known in the setting.
Okay.
Or, and I think this speaks a little bit more to this, I like it when the magic and fantasy elements feel more integrated with the history and with the folklore, the real world folklore. So I compare it to Times That Fry. I think Times That Fry is a great comparison. I love Times That Fry Men Souls. And the way that does the fantasy elements, the fantasy elements feel more like we're just 1 or 2 degrees away from it being a real thing.
Yeah.
There are folklore things, there are aspects of the history that the fantasy elements are sort of just heightening and tapping into.
Yeah, sure.
Whereas in this module in Bad Kansas City, it's just loaded up with demons and dragons. And
I see your point.
right?
I see your point. Oh, we should add, by the way, for the listeners, that Times That Fry Men Souls is also written by Sean McAnally. So it's hence comparison.
Yeah.
This is fascinating, by the way, because I'm exactly the same. I also don't like urban fantasy where it's like Shadowrun, but like you're the private investigator's also an orc or something. But it had never occurred to me that this might be that kind of urban fantasy. But you're right. You can read it that way, that this is all kind of upfront and known. But when I read it, it didn't occur to me at all. I just thought this is like an occult underground and all the normal stuff is going on around it. But you're right. That's a totally valid reading. And I also would, if I had run it that way, I also wouldn't have liked it as much. I also think you got a very valid point about how when it's good, and actually, we're meant to be talking about things we like first, so we will get to that. But yeah, when we come to the criticism, I do think you're right that it's a bit more scattershot in a way. And when it's at its best, it's when it's tied into things that people in Kansas City in the 1930s were really thinking about, or talking about.
That's exactly right.
That is when it is really, really cool.
And I just think Times That Fry just does a better job of it than this did.
It's more compact. Having said that,
things we like.
And I'll say for the most abstract but top level thing I like about it is we always say that what we like about a game book is when it gives you something that you can't do yourself.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's because they're like, I don't know, they've rolled up a bunch of traveler planets and you don't have time to do that. But when it's at its best, it's something you couldn't think of. And man, you could sit me down in front of a camera for like 24 hours, keep bringing me snacks and tell me to come up with OSR or game setting ideas. I would never get to 1930s Kansas City with a demon for the mayor. Yeah. It's brilliant. It's textbook. I would never have thought of this. And it is so densely packed, right?
It is.
The Hexcrawl format helps, although more about that later. But there's this feeling throughout that there are thousands of possibilities, even though it has the general direction provided by the story threads and the overarching villain, who is Mayor Pendergeist. And it's all unified by this theme of corruption, which is good too.
I agree with all that. That's all really valid. I like to start my thoughts always at a technical level. I do think the presentation here is quite plain, and there's almost no art, but it's at least readable. And I do like that the vast majority of hexes can be found on a single page. I have to imagine that made it easy to use and navigate at the table. Was that your experience?
Oh, yeah, definitely. If anything, the multi-page hexes, although they had to be multi-pages because they were so important, were more of a hassle. Like having it just that single page, the main thing, and then a sort of backup item to work on. That was perfect. I think if it did have more art, I would kind of not want it to be in that main section. I'd sort of like to have an appendix, so like here's all the illustrations for you to to show people at the back or something would be good, because just being able to know exactly that hex 85 is going to be 3 pages on from hex 82, that was really useful, just sitting there at the table, getting from one place to the other. Especially as it's an urban set game, the characters are always much more mobile from one location to the other. That's just sort of a factor of the setting.
That's an interesting thing I've never thought about in a hexcrawl. In a fantasy setting, the assumption is the characters can't move that quickly between hexes, right?
Yeah.
It might take hours or days. But in this, they can presumably they can jump in a car and drive,
there was a lot of ticking taxis. Yeah, exactly. So, and you only really need the hexes when there's a bit like if someone's trying to get across town in a hurry or lose somebody in a chase, if it's a problem that they might have to go across town. But most of the time, you just cut to the next scene and it's happened. But I think it is valuable still to have those hexes, because there's a sense that, well, in fact, out of character, I would just tell the players, you can pretty much go anywhere on the map and just start poking around, like your character has a hunch or something, and there's something to do. And I think they found that very, invigorating. Just they didn't actually do it. I don't think they ever did just wander to a random hex. They had no reason to, but knowing that there was always something, I don't know. It just, well, I can give you some comments. I polled the players before this episode.
Oh, yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah, so Gavin says it felt like there was always a lot going on, plenty of threads you could follow or not and try to tie together. The whole place felt like it had a real depth to it. So many places to go and interact with. Cameos are funny and creative and gave this feeling of a place out of time. That's an interesting thing to mention, actually. And he mentions a couple of highlights, which maybe we'll come back to. But yeah, I think there is this interesting idea that although it is a historical setting, because it's an alternate demon-infested one, it's a good place to be, basically. You don't feel like you have to know anything about 1930s Kansas City, which is good, because I know I didn't. And yet, it doesn't feel totally unmoored. So that's another thing that really helps with it, that there is something about that historical grounding that gives you a feeling of maybe real stakes at work, even though, of course, it's all preposterous magic nonsense stuff,
Well, it's actually really interesting because that actually connects up with a couple of things I liked about this. The first being that I do think there's actually a fairly good mix of magical and mundane events going on. In that 2/3 of the page is the main thing, and then 1/3 of the page is the little sub-encounter. It was usually the sub-encounter that was the mundane thing, right?
Yeah,
some little random weird thing going on. I thought that mix was pretty good. It took the edge off of my hesitation with this book that there's too much magic stuff and it's too front and center. There actually are quite a lot of interesting, mundane things going on. That goes back to this idea of, I think if you're playing it, the mundane stuff probably feels a lot more present and the magic stuff probably gets woven in more organically than it seems like it is on the page. In fact, there's a pretty good mix, I think.
That's definitely true. And even when you are dealing with, because there's sort of a lot of sorcerers, well, not a lot, 8, 12, I don't know, a bunch of sorcerers in the city.
There are a lot of sorcerers, yeah.
But they're all doing things for fairly petty, realistic reasons as well. They're not trying to take over the world. There's one character who wants to be a witch, but this sort of society magic lady won't teach her any spells, and she's annoyed about it. All that kind of thing, and that, I think, helps. It does have this really, even though it's all quite over the top and grand guignol goriness to it a lot of the time, or big magical effects, demons and otherworldly spaces, at the same time it feels really grimy and seedy. It really feels like a demon-infested city. A lot of the time you have a demonic antagonist in a role-playing game, or you're presented with a setting and, this place is really full of demons, they're so evil. And you kind of look at what's going on in that place and think, this seems not that bad. This is bad, though. The clue is in the title, Bad Kansas City. He is not kidding about how bad it is. Yeah. And that, I think, is, well, I was about to say to its credit. I don't know if it's to its credit exactly in the normal way of saying that kind of thing, but it really works.
Okay.
Yeah, also being tied into real-world demonology texts of the Renaissance era and kind of Victorian era. That has a good off-the-table thing as well as thematic unity, because people can go Google the name of a demon they've just heard about, see a disgusting engraving from the 1800s and get freaked out by it. So that's another nice one.
Interesting. I have some thoughts on the vibes of this, I think, when we get to the question section. So I'm going to put a pin in that for a moment. I do want to say, though, my other connected thought I wanted to say, there's a really nice balance in this between random seeming encounters and encounters that are part of the bigger story threads, like the Pendergeist stuff, the stuff with all the sorcerers, the Key of Solomon stuff, all that stuff. there's a really good mix of things that it seems like the characters are stumbling upon that have no connection to the bigger plot, and things that when you press a little bit more, you discover they're part of one of these bigger plot threads. And I think it makes the whole thing feel at once quite like random and organic, but also really coherent. And so I think it's really successful in that way. Was that your feeling in the play of it as well?
Yeah. And that did come up a few times. It's assumed deliberately not made into a big deal. But basically, if you have enough of those things that are slightly connected, as you say, most of them will never get pushed on for it to be discovered. But the one or two times that they did do that, and they, you follow someone to their next secret meeting or whatever, and then it's revealed there is a connection, then everyone goes, oh, it's like, it's that, you're right, it's that finding a connection.
Yeah.
It has that feeling of things all being potentially connected. Yeah, it is a big book though, and I think perhaps, you've probably read this through in a way that I never did. I think I read the intro, got interested in it, flipped through, and then just said, okay, guys, we're going to go play this. And so I read all the hexes in the end.
That is absolutely the better approach.
Which I think is the way you better do it.
That is the absolute better approach. Reading it straight through is different.
Because I think, if you read it straight through, there's kind of too much of stuff. Like, for example, there are lots of the unconnected things that, I wasn't going to definitely not put into my game, but I wasn't so into them. Like, there's a kid who's got an invisible friend who's a troll that lives under a bridge or something. I didn't really like that. Bit twee for me. I definitely wasn't going to bring in the animal sex shows that are going on at the stockyards at an open table.
Right, yeah.
I didn't exactly direct anyone towards that. But at the same time, that's the thing. Even though we did 5 sessions, by the way, this was a big hit with the players. Like, one player after session 2 went, can we just play this all the time? This is amazing. But the others, I don't think you can. I think 5 or 6 sessions is it, because you only want to get to half the hexes. If you were to exhaustively explore everything, it would be too much.
Yeah.
And that's because Sean has deliberately overloaded everything so that the ones you do see add up to the right amount.
And it goes back to what I said at the very top. I really feel like playing this is a quite different experience than just reading it. This is one of those cases where playing it is going to make such a big difference. Other things that I liked, this module is filled with loads of weird little guys.
you do love a weird little guy.
If you want some weird dudes, this is filled with weird dudes.
Oh, man.
I love that. Just weird dudes doing their thing in Kansas City, living their weird lives. There's this guy firing off rockets in the street. There's this strange aging novelist. You've got Poison Candy Girl. There's just so many weirdos. And so I kind of love those.
Yeah, that's good. Oh, I want to call out one highlight of a set piece, which is the asylum, which is like basically an entirely separate scenario. Like, it would just be an adventure by itself half the time. You can get sent by the mayor's evil machine to the asylum if you cause trouble. You just get committed.
Yeah.
And of course, like in most Pulp Fiction stories, the director of the asylum is an insane serial killer, and he has a murder labyrinth in the basement, and you end up there. And it doesn't occupy too much space, but we spent, I would say, most of one session on that after 2 people got sent there, and the others are trying to figure out where they are and rescue them. And it's just really, really good, because I think it's emblematic of the city as a whole in microcosm. The person who is in charge is insane and evil. You're under his power, and you need to work together with a couple of things to overcome him. One is you have to make alliances with people to help you get out of the trouble you're in. And the other thing is you have to learn how the machine works, the routine of the guards, or where are the blind spots in how they run the show. And that's how you can escape. Another thing, there's a whole thing with one-way mirrors, like in Enter the Dragon.
Yeah.
At one point, a player just smashed a mirror, and that's what you got to do. You got to break the mirror to get out. And then, that's also the key to dealing with Pendergeist the mayor. So
that's pretty cool.
Really good set piece, yeah.
Set pieces. I agree completely. This book is loaded with terrific set pieces. There's so many little fun things. I also really enjoyed the Insane Asylum. There's this one set piece involving dogs digging up Pendergeist's victims out in the city.
Yeah.
And then the victims are roaming around as ghosts. That's just so cool.
Yeah.
There's a man chopping up and burying his wife. And here I have a little side digression because this is the way my brain works. But that encounter with the man chopping up and burying his wife is almost identical to my first 10 minutes playing Red Dead Redemption 2. I first started playing Red Dead Redemption 2. I had no idea how the game's mechanics worked. I had no idea what I was doing. I was still learning the controls. And I stumbled onto a dude murdering his wife.
Oh, what are like one of the random encounter things, basically.
Yeah. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? I don't even know how to walk around and draw my gun.
Yeah.
And here's a guy murdering his wife in the middle of the night. Like, it was so... Anyway.
Yeah. That game is very OSR, by the way. It's just...
It really is. It's such an OSR game. I mean, I think we've said that before.
Yeah.
Oh, the Monroe Hotel set piece is
very
really,
good.
really fabulous. Yeah, everybody loves a haunted hotel, right? So good. There's another big set piece that I want to talk about in the next bit because I have like more mixed feelings on it.
Okay.
But in any case, yeah. This module has some really, really genuinely grim moments. There's this homeless family sleeping in the park, and you can help them or not help them, but if you don't help them, they get knifed to death later.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's really a bad
dark,
town.
Right?
Yeah.
It's really bad, yeah. Before we leave things we liked, I do want to say that the back quarter of the book is really terrific. It is so, so good, and it's not quite on its own a reason to buy this. It's definitely a big ad. It's a good value.
Although, actually, another of Jeremiah's comments was that this book is criminally cheap on Drive-Thru RPG, so maybe...
Yeah. How much is it, incidentally?
I think he said $2.
What?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Oh yeah. Okay. Throw away all my comments, listeners. For $2, you should definitely buy this for $2.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. That stuff at the back.
It's so good.
Every player rolled their name randomly because that random name table is so good.
Yeah. It's so many good little historical details. So many good folkloric details.
Yeah.
So much research went into it. I really, really appreciated it, and it all seemed like stuff that would be like actually helpful in session planning.
Yeah, in planning, like you couldn't, for example, the timeline, I maybe didn't use as much as I should have. It was like session 4 out of 5. I looked at it and thought, I should have used some of this stuff. But there's that. And then like all the names are just great for when you're on making up NPCs on the hoof.
Despite the impeccable research, I will make a note that the radio station in this book starts with a W, the call sign. And on this side of the Mississippi River, they start with Ks. So I just want to throw that out there.
Or was that
a mistake?
Or is that a thing that was different in the 30s? Maybe. Okay,
well, maybe it was. I don't know. Maybe it was. Okay. I don't know. It's a W radio station. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be a K.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah. Okay, that's a very, very nitpicky, minor, stupid thing.
Classic.
In general, the research is impeccable, and there was a lot of cool information.
Oh, it's got a whole subplot about the treasure of the James Younger gang, which I assume is well researched.
Yeah.
Cool.
Anything else you want to say about things you liked?
I should talk about the villain a bit. We haven't really mentioned Mayor Pendergeist.
Pendergeist.
He's awful. Like, his lieutenants are bad enough. Like, the police chief, there was a lot of tangling with the police chief. But yeah, he's a literal demon.
He's a proper villain, right?
He's genuinely up to no good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But you can take him down through, tax evasion. Or by finding a big magic sword and using that. We came perilously close to a total party kill in that final confrontation. And I think what I like about it is that both a good and bad ending to fighting that guy are interesting, because if you win, brilliant, unbelievable, and if you don't, it's the downer horror movie ending, isn't it? It's like you tried your best.
Oh yeah, that's good.
Now the demons are in charge, and we're rolling into World War II and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, good villain, very nice.
Love it. Okay, questions we had about the module. I have a few.
Yes, you do.
And they're not questions; they're just complaints.
Okay,
so let's just start. Let's dive right in. Okay, here's the thing. All of my issues with this are some variation of, I think the writing is a little dodgy. Mm-hmm. But I want to unpack that a little bit. There were a couple of technical writing things that bugged me. I think I counted 20 uses of the adjective demented, which was really annoying. And maybe that's one of those, like, you should not just read this straight through because you're more aware of issues like that.
Yeah.
There were a couple of repeated encounters, 2 potential suicide jumpers, and then the names of the characters veered into the silly, in my opinion.
They did a bit. Yeah. Mostly at the table, they went down quite well because they're so memorable, especially the gangster names, But yeah, that's fair.
That is the advantage of it. Yeah. There are pop culture references that are obvious in a way that I don't love, like the whole Vic Vincent, Vincent Vega Pulp Fiction thing, the reference to Dune worms, the sandworms and all that stuff. There was just parts of this that I felt like.
Yeah, although I regret to tell you, my friend, I've got like 20-somethings on my table. They don't get Pulp Fiction references anymore.
Fair enough. Yeah, okay. Totally fair. My bigger issue with the writing is I just wanted more. There's a lot of great ideas here, But I don't feel like things really sung on the page, at least.
I know what you mean. I think the ones that are important in play they're all set up and ready to go. Mm-hmm. Actually, again, I'm thinking of like that kid who's got an invisible friend who's actually a monster. Mm-hmm. What do I do with that? And actually, I suppose the thing is I don't necessarily need to do anything with it. Sometimes it's just a thing that players will look at and move on, or it's a thing they'll look at and decide to go deal with. Or they'll do like half and half, like the Rudolph Valentino's ghost thing, where somebody sort of made out with it briefly and then they never went back there.
Yeah.
Like I do know what you mean though. Yeah, it's just sort of.
I wanted more description. I wanted more detail in some of these things.
Yeah.
A lot of it was just like, here's a thing, and now we're moving on to the next thing, and here's another thing. I just wanted something from a sort of creative writing standpoint that I could wrap my hands around and get into. And again, I think it speaks to this theme of the day, which is maybe this is not meant to be read like a book. You're not having the proper experience just reading it like for pleasure.
That probably is part of it. But I think it's still fair to look at
it needs a little something.
It
needs a little something. I do want to highlight one thing that I think is really emblematic of how I've struggled with this text. There is this encounter in Hex 006. That's the animal sex show bestiality.
Northwest.
Thing, right?
The stockyards, yeah.
Yeah, the stockyards. There is this encounter where there are these goats, okay? And these goats have a worm that causes people who get infected by it to behave in violent and satanic ways. When I read this, my initial thinking is, okay, I get it. I get what the author is doing here. The author is connecting up with the historical and pop culture association of goats and the devil. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking goats, I'm thinking the devil. Okay, here's this encounter that I'm crafting that is goats leading to the devil, that's leading to Satanism. In a lot of these encounters, this is just an example of one. In a lot of these encounters, you can kind of see the thought process. Like, here is the pop culture or historical inspiration, and now here's me making it magic, making it fantasy, right? And I can't really decide if I love this or hate it. On the one end, I kind of hate it because it feels a little hacky. But on the other side, I get it. I kind of love it because it's doing a lot of work, I imagine, at the table. A lot of players, maybe depending on the culture you come from, but in general, players are going to they're going to know that association between goats and the devil. And so it's going to maybe fire off in their head in the right way. And so I get that. And then when you combine this particular encounter with all the other things going on in that hex, the bestiality, the animal sex shows, there's a lot of gross stuff. I think it all comes together to sort of paint this picture of like something really diabolical, and I'm here for it. But I still kind of struggle with this. Like, I can almost see the thought process.
It's kind of annoying that you can see the scaffolding in your mind's eye. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I can see it. I can see like how this was devised. So I just have like kind of really conflicted feelings about the writing of this as a result. I don't think it's bad. I just think that maybe it is not my thing. And I think that maybe this is best not read for pleasure and just used at the table. So let's talk about the celebrity cameos. I find them deeply annoying. I know you like them.
Yes. Well, as you know, I'm a fan of celebrity cameo anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Why do you not like the celebrity cameos, Jason?
Let me give you another example.
I'm sure
Al Capone. There's Al Capone.
Yeah.
Okay. Al Capone shows up at a steakhouse and he has a steak. Okay, great. Love that. The inclusion of this is deeply annoying to me because Al Capone does not do anything in the moment, does not do anything in the encounter that would make you think he's dastardly or that would make the player characters want to interact with him in any way or to kill him or to do anything to him. The only reason why players might want to do that is if they know something historically about Al Capone.
Yeah.
And so the presence of Al Capone in the module then just feels like a literal cameo. It doesn't feel like it has any reason to be in the story, except to say, look, here's Al Capone.
Well,
right?
Arguably correct. And I think, that's like a historical thing anyway. But also, don't forget, in character, Al Capone is also famous in the 30s. And so
that's fair. Yeah, that's true. Okay,
what happened in our game, though, is that he was in the steakhouse. So with the PCs, they were scoping out the distillery nearby. And completely opposite to what happened when I was playing a game of Vampire the Masquerade, where Al Capone is a stupid cameo. Instead of rolling their eyes and ignoring him, the player characters fangirled out, made a point of buying drinks for his table, made friends with him, and 2 episodes later when somebody got shot, they called him at the hotel he was staying at and he arranged for them to be treated by a vet he knows who'll stitch people up without reporting it to the cops. And it was like a whole thing. I couldn't believe how excited they were about Al Capone being in this scenario.
Okay.
I think you're right. It doesn't make any sense, but it did happen. So, yeah, I don't know, man. It just... Sometimes
better in
Al
play.
Capone's just, I don't know.
Yeah, better in play. I'm fully acknowledging all of that.
Yeah. I do think actual celebrity cameos have value, though.
I did think the Rudy Valentino ghost was cool.
That was cool. And actually, I'll come back to that in a second. But I think a lot of the time, if you're in a fantasy game, there's meant to be like a commotion when this famous person comes into the tavern. And oh, look, why isn't that very famous elf over there? Yes, very famous elf is visiting the town. But no one's excited. It's a pretend celebrity. But Al Capone,
that's a good point.
That is a celebrity.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. Rudolph Valentino, when I mentioned him, only one person at the table knew who he was.
Yeah.
So the others are going like, why are all these middle-aged women freaking out about it, maybe being Rudolph Valentino? And I said, Google image search him. And they went, whatever, he's from the 20s. And I went, just Google image search him. And then they went, oh. Exactly. Rudolph Valentino is a good one. And he's haunting Kansas City for a hilariously minor reason, isn't it? Like he regrets insulting it in life and he's come back to apologize or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Yeah.
I actually do have an actual question in this segment.
Oh, yeah.
So my actual question is, do you think the module, or the book rather, is hindered by the fact that it's meant to be used with a traditional fantasy adventure game? I found myself taken right out of it every time it would refer to adventurers and magic items, or when seemingly cool encounters would be reduced to something like D&D. Once again, I imagine it's less of a problem in play, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely takes me out of it when I'm reading it as the GM, but the players can't see it, so not too bad. Yeah. And of course, it does have the advantage of, well, it's what they always say about OSR, right? It's the Rosetta Stone. So, you know exactly what the difference between a fourth and second level, whatever, and how many hit points they have. So it is weird, but yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
I will say that I found a number of instances in the text where if it had not been for like D&D, I think there might have been something cooler. There's one encounter where the players can like see this weird person pushing a baby carriage and the baby carriage like slowly rolls towards them or something like that. And when they go look in the baby carriage, there's just a magic item in it. And like, okay, fine. But wouldn't that be cooler if it was like something like weirder or like grosser,
Well,
like
almost anything or nothing at all.
Or nothing, or I don't know. Yeah. Or just like, it felt like a missed opportunity, And I felt like there are times throughout the book where if this wasn't hindered by D&D, like you could do something really cool here,
I wonder.
Right?
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, all in all, before we move on from this, I think there's so many good ideas in this book, and there's so many cool set pieces and so many cool things. I have some issues with some choices that were made, but you should definitely go buy it. So
yeah. Okay. Episode over. Bye.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, let's go on to the chain lightning round. Tom.
A small shack by the road sells cashews. The cashew man is Jethro Prather, who has a wealth of knowledge about the great worm Daddy Longtorso, who tunnels beneath the soggy flats. The heart of the creature is a vital ingredient in a ritual several wicked magic users wish to conduct.
A turtle strides across the road. Observant PCs may notice something written on the creature's shell. It may be something innocuous, a child's name, perhaps, or at the referee's discretion, it could be the address of any single location the referee wants the PCs to visit. Weird.
Depending on how things turn out for Luigi Vega, his wife could either be overjoyed or devastated. If something untoward should happen to him, consider having her flip out Charles Bronson style, becoming a vigilante.
In the big museum set piece, there is a painting, Jezebel, that has the power to entrance viewers. I am a total simp for magical paintings that enthrall you. So yeah, that works for me.
Nice. And finally for me, I think my favourite single paragraph in the whole book. A 9-year-old boy, Billy McGillicuddy, is crying and calling for help, having been jostled into a patch of daisies by a small-time thief, Richard the Jostler.
I will highlight Derek Tubbs, an NPC who believes all gingers are fire elementals who long to be set aflame. Let's go to the expert delve. Hi listeners, Jason here. If you're enjoying this podcast, you should support it and everything we do in the Gauntlet by joining us on Patreon. We have 3 pledge tiers available for new supporters in 2024. The $2 pledge is a great way of saying thank you for everything we do, and it goes a long way toward helping us make this show. You also get some perks on our Discord, such as a special name badge showing you're on the team, and access to Patreon exclusive channels. At $7, you get early access to Gauntlet publications, as well as access to a number of exclusive releases. In recent weeks, the $7 feed has featured Cut to Christmas, a new mystery for public access, Places in the Wild, which are standalone adventure sets for Trophy Gold, Sweet Jolly Crunch Tooth, a new playbook for the Silt vs. role-playing game, Squatcher Step, a new mystery for Brindlewood Bay, and much more. And we have a ton of new releases heading to the feed in 2024, including brand new games and scenarios and support material for existing games. Finally, at the $10 level, in addition to all the aforementioned stuff, you will receive a monthly invite to a special 2-hour coffee chat hosted by me, where you and other $10 patrons can chat about the games you're running, talk about game design, and just generally hang out with a fine group of like-minded people. So head over to patreon.com/gauntlet and pledge today. If you can't pledge to Patreon right now, there are other ways of helping us out, such as leaving a 5-star review on this podcast or on one of our drive-thru RPG pages. No matter how you help us, please know that we appreciate it and we're delighted you've decided to go on this journey with us. Take care. It's the Expert Delve, and our topic is the Hardboiled Hexcrawl. Tom, that's a fabulous title, but I have no idea what we're talking about. Help me get through it.
I only hope this thing can live up to the excellent title. Basically, I ran this scenario in a, for me, slightly unusual way. I thought we could talk about it.
Okay.
About how it went. You can interrogate my decisions, and yeah.
That's what I'm doing today, interrogating decisions that were made. So, yeah.
yeah. Apparently so. As you may recall, I am one of 2 or 3 or 4 people who GM a weekly open table DCC campaign, Dungeon Crawl Classics. So when I was running this, I knew that even if it was outside the continuity or whatever of the ongoing game, I wanted people to come in and know what they were doing. So I thought, I will just run this with Dungeon Crawl Classics because that's pretty easy. Yeah. Also because the Purple Sorcerer website has a 1920s Call of Cthulhu-ish 0-level character generator. So I thought, well, I'll just use that for the backgrounds. And that meant that when people showed up to play this game, I was able to hand them a stack of only one 0-level character, though, not the 4 that you normally get. And I would give them one little mini character sheet with a plumber on it, or an electrician, or a burglar, or something. Yeah. And they would take that, and then we would immediately level them up to not being a 0-level scrub.
Yeah.
Okay. And I did restrict the classes a bit. You could be a fighter, a thief, maybe a wizard if you asked really nicely, but you didn't start with any spells, because a lot of the game in Bad Kansas City is going around town finding spells written in books or on scrolls or just wheedling them out of a wizard. And in theory, someone could have played a cleric, but nobody chose to play an ordained minister of religion, so that didn't come up. But the other thing about the leveling up was, because I wanted to have this be a contained story where action basically escalated from one session to the next, what you leveled up to was not 1 or relative to everyone else. It was just whatever number session that is, that's what level everyone is going to be. So if you come in for the first time in session 4, you immediately become a 4th level thief or whatever. And that was pretty useful because it meant we had that Pulp Fiction story arc of where you get beaten up by thugs in alleyways at the beginning, and then by the end you're stabbing a demon to death with a big magic sword. Well, maybe that's not exactly how most Pulp Fictions go, but you know what I mean. You stumble through it, you get more competent in narrative terms, if maybe not diegetically within the fiction. You start to win out more, and then you have like a big confrontation, and you can take on the, to be honest, quite high-powered minions of the machine by the end. There's a lot of 3rd and 5th level fighters knocking around in that police department. I will say. So, yeah, that was basically the structure, or in terms of what the characters were doing, is they were given the standard DCC or standard D&D-like classes, but it was all couched within the idea of them just being, good in a fight or good at sneaking around and criminal activities, that kind of thing,
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it seems to me like the challenge that you have when doing a hex crawl in a system like DCC in a really atypical setting like this one is to translate the tropes of the dungeon crawl, the tropes of DCC specifically, into this setting and making it Bad Kansas City, making it 1930s Kansas City. Like, it occurs to me, like, what I would would have probably done, or just an idea that I had, is you could do like a funnel for the 0 level characters, like have a bunch of 0 level characters do the traditional DCC funnel, but instead of it being a dungeon that the characters are worming their way through, it's a night at a series of jazz clubs or something.
Oh, that's actually, I wish I'd done that now.
Yeah, like it's not like, are they going to live or die? It's, are they conscious at the end of it? Like, or are they
are they adventure material to do the rest of this
like, can they like hold their liquor?
Yeah.
If you end up completely drunk under the table or passed out and robbed or whatever, you don't get to do the adventure. Only if you survive the night, so to speak.
Oh, yeah, because like the inciting incident could be like whoever's still awake or conscious is the one who sees the truth about the mayor or something, and then they have to do it.
Oh my God. Look,
that's good.
We're doing it live. We're doing it in real time here, listeners. I love it. It's so good.
Yeah, because I will confess what I did say to everyone joining the game. It's just like, here's the deal, Kansas City, the mayor's a demon, and it's just like, you know that the mayor's in league with hell, although they didn't find out he was an actual demon until much later. You have decided you're going to bring him down.
Yeah.
Now, I don't care why you've decided that, but you have to. That has to be the motivation, because if you just drop them into the city and they're not doing anything, it is quite static. And I think the intro does describe it as I think he describes it as a setting rather than an adventure. And I think that is an important distinction. But you're right, though. Having a nice inciting incident funnel would have been
pretty cool,
next time I run this. I'll do 6 episodes, but that's
what we're talking about, right? We're talking about the hardboiled hexcrawl. We're talking about like, how do we take this standard dungeon crawling fantasy adventure framework of a campaign and making it into hard-boiled fiction, right? So I'm curious for you to keep going. What did you do next?
So that's great. Another thing you do is you have to make all of the moves bigger. This is a thing I come across quite a bit with people who've got used to the classic dungeon crawl. In this, and even in, I'm running Monster Hearts at the moment, and even then I'm having people say stuff like, okay, I go talk to the emissary of the Dark Power, but I make sure I'm standing far enough away that he can't grab me, and I'm going, this is not how this game works.
Yeah.
In a dungeon crawl, that stuff is pretty fun, like edging up to a doorway, getting ready. But in the hard-boiled story, you don't do that. You just say things like, I go down to 8th Street and I start asking around for Fast Eddie to see what's up with him. You don't do that kind of thing where you're sort of trying to just have your character do stuff and almost try and get the GM to intuit what you want to happen. No, you just say, I want to find this guy, and then let's see what happens. And I would keep repeating at the start of each session, sometimes in the middle of the session, that there are not really any secrets in the city for the characters. They either are natives of the city or they've been there long enough, they know where to go find stuff. Unless somebody's actively avoiding them, if they want to go talk to the chief of police, they know where he is. They want to go talk to that detective guy in the jazz district, they know where his office is. It's not hard to just have a scene where they meet up. That's a big problem in any, because it's not a mystery game, but in this kind of city roving thing, where I think people often sort of forget that their characters know more about the setting than they do, and they could just pick up and make it happen.
Well, and also, if we look at the sort of like genre influences here, if we look at noir, if we look at hard-boiled fiction, if we look at those things, we've talked about this in previous episodes. It is not forensic inquiry.
No.
It is not like detailed on the ground looking at environment investigation. It's talking to people. It's shaking people down.
Yeah.
It's going to that guy over by the docks who does XYZ, and that his girlfriend is stepping out on him. It's that kind of thing, right? It's not like this, what do I see here? What do I see there? That's not what it is, right? It's different. It's operating at a different level.
Yeah, and part of that is on the GM, right? You can't
Absolutely.
have cagey NPCs. You got to have them spell stuff.
Yep.
You got to have them, and of course, there's loads of demons in this setting that will
PCs shake them, sometimes fall out, right?
Exactly. Although brilliantly, at one point, the PCs hired that cool detective from the Jazz District to go investigate stuff for them. Yeah. So he would phone them up with stuff like,
that's cool. Yeah, that's good.
I found him, but he's already dead. That kind of thing. So, that was... I don't think I've ever seen that happen before in a role-playing game, actually. But there we go. It is also useful to think about this kind of like a point crawl as well, but not really a point crawl. Classic mystery GM thing. Remind the players what their leads are or what their main options are. And normally what I like to do is, I'll go through things that happened last session, but then I'll try and present, I would say, a couple of things, what I think are the 2 main options. Even if I know there are like 3 or 4 or 5, I won't say any of the others. I'll just say, you could go and talk to your friend down at the racetrack, or you could try tailing the guy in your car, or maybe something else. I always have the third option be or something else, because that way I'm reminding them that they're not constricted, but I'm also not giving them this laundry list of paralyzing options to go through.
I run loads of mystery and investigation games, and let me tell you, the best thing you can do for yourself as a GM of such games is to keep a little short list of leads to remind the players of at the start of a session. It is so necessary. You have to just be like, here's like 4 or 5 things that you have leads on, because the players are, even if they're taking really good notes, sometimes they just need to have it presented in this really streamlined, simple way. Because I find that in investigation and mystery games, their minds are going like all over the place trying to like connect the threads and connect the dots, that they sometimes fail to see the simple, basic things. And so you can help yourself a lot as a GM of these games by always keeping track of, here are the 3 or 4 things that you can go follow up on, just to keep it really simple and focused.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think is not just helpful for keeping the game going, but also is in the hardboiled genre, is sometimes the leads come to the players, and that's not to kind of patronize them, but you've got to remember that in this genre, the bad guys are not masterminds. Well, I mean, a little bit they are.
Except for Pendergeist,
yeah. And they will make mistakes. So, they'll do things like they see the player characters poking around at their illegal gambling den, and rather than thinking those guys probably don't suspect anything, which is correct maybe, they send a couple thugs to rough them up and say, stay away from Mr. Giuliano's place. And then suddenly now you're suspicious about it. And it's good to have basically NPCs who have flaws like this. They're too proud to let something go. They're too paranoid to not screw up. And it doesn't always have to be the guy with a gun coming through the door, but even something as simple as realizing you're being watched and then turning the tables and following that guy back to wherever he works. This is all classic stuff. And even though it's arguably ham-handed, it's such a fun trope to do.
What a fun exercise, taking the tropes of a very well-established genre and like translating them into fantasy adventure mode. Like, that's really intriguing.
I think we can maybe round this out by talking about the overall structure of the mini campaign, which I felt worked really well.
Okay.
But it did require a bit of active thinking from me in maybe the opening 20 to 30 minutes of each session. So it was 5 sessions long. It was leveling up all the way. So basically it was explicit. By the end, you should be powerful enough to take on the mayor and his elite level goons. But of course it was still an open table with a rotating cast. Some people only played 1 or 2 sessions and not the last one. I was always cognizant of the fact that it needed to still be fun each session.
Yeah.
And so doing that bit with the leads at the beginning of the session meant that I could set up an objective to go deal with in that session. And that way, whether that succeeds or fails, you still have, even if you only play 1 of the episodes, you're like the sort of the minor character that gets brought in to help rob a bank in some TV show, right? But you could go away and say, I had a great time. We got attacked by a weird demon. I fired a Tommy gun out of a moving vehicle. It's like, maybe not this genre in general, but something like Bad Kansas City, which has these sort of gory and over-the-top exciting things happening, is well suited for that. Maybe you only get to do part of the story thing just because there's always going to be something spectacular and memorable that happens in each bit.
This is a great setup for drop-in, drop-out play. Because it's a city, you can easily explain away a character's absence or presence. It's not that big of a deal. Whereas if you were doing like a big dungeon crawl or something, it's a little awkward if the characters are presently stuck inside a 40 by 60 foot chamber and the next session one of the characters isn't there, right? Like that's a weirder thing to do. So this kind of hex crawl in this urban environment is fabulous for this kind of open table style play, I would think.
And I think you could steal bits of maybe the tone or the setup for any other genre as well, as long as you can find a way to make it a bit, I like to say, like a directed hex crawl, not just an exploratory one. It would. I think it's pretty transferable, or I hope it is. So,
absolutely.
Because otherwise, people are only going to be able to use this expert delve for games set in Kansas City in the 1930s, which is, as we've mentioned, a little niche.
Well, is there anything else we want to say about this niche expert delve?
No, I think we've filled the niche well enough for now.
Indeed, we have. All right, let's go on to the next segment then. Okay, it's companion adventures, and it looks like you have a few films. I have a film as well. Why don't you run through your films?
Okay, I'll do my films quickly. The first one is Devil in a Blue Dress from 1995. I'm recommending the film because I have not read the novel. Directed by Carl Franklin. Not as good as One False Move, but still pretty good. And it's, I think the main character in this is the model for the African-American detective who appears in Bad Kansas City, because he's cool and has a nice suit and all that kind of stuff. Other film, 1955's Kiss Me Deadly. You will never see another film that hates its own main character as much as this one, because it's directed by, I've forgotten his name now. Anyway, a slightly left-leaning director adapting a novel by the very right-wing Mickey Spillane, and and it's sort of a very late noir, and it involves radioactive material in a suitcase that people are searching for, which is pretty cool. Although I don't know, man, it's weird. It's good though. Eyes Wide Shut, 1999. You want your weird undergrounds with the aristocrats.
This is an interesting choice. Yeah.
That's that. And to us, actually, there's a lot of films you could recommend for this kind of genre. Really, so I'm gonna stop there with those three. But I think those cover the various aspects that I think are key to the Bad Kansas City. Anyway, what's your film?
Actually, I have two, not just one. I don't know why I thought I had one. The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford from 2007, just because there's like historical, like the history of Jesse James and the James Gang, like figures prominently in Bad Kansas City. And also the 1996 Robert Altman film Kansas City, which is set, starring Jennifer Jason Leigh, which is set in this time period and is probably going to be a pretty good touchstone for what this is like. RPG recommendations. I think we're both recommending Times That Fry Men's Souls, Sean's other book.
Yeah, that's right.
The superior one, in my opinion, but yeah.
I kind of agree, but maybe not as expansive as this one. There's also the much smaller one he's done called Mission Excalibur, which is about a team of commandos trying to steal Excalibur from the Nazis in an old sort of, I ran it a little while ago. I think it's basically much more tightly focused. It's sort of a commandos attacking an occupied village kind of thing. Also features a character that I just realised on this recent read-through appears in Bad Kansas City, namely the celebrated actor of stage and screen Cleveland Pudding. Another one of those very serious names that you love so much.
Yes.
And the other RPG to recommend is Unknown Armies, which I think is a similar occult underground as in Bad Kansas City, but moved forward to the 1990s or the 2000s, depending on which edition you're playing.
Read Cleveland Pudding. I love a shared universe setting with a character that connects them all, so I'm here for that. It makes me want to go look at Times at Fry and see if there's something similar there as well.
Oh, yeah, maybe, yeah.
There might be. I'm going to recommend Harlem Unbound. I think I've recommended that in other episodes, but I really like it here because, along with Times at Fry, I think it's a really good example of a similar type of setting that, in my opinion, does a better job of incorporating the historical and folkloric aspects of the setting into the magic, or making the magic fit into the actual real world history and folklore a little better. So it's a good read in that way. It also takes place in the 1930s as well.
Okay.
Books.
Oh, books, yeah. So just a few very general recommendations. Obviously, everyone should be reading Raymond Chandler anyway. I think the one that best fits the Bad Kansas City mood of his would be Farewell, My Lovely. I think it has the robust twists and turns and relationships that fit well here. Dashiell Hammett, probably not the more detective-y books, but his more two-fisted pulp tales. Speaking of which, probably not Mickey Spillane, but if you must, I mean, it has a certain page turning.
Right, yeah.
Whatever. And I am going to mention Robert E. Howard because I remembered he has this boxing character called something like Sailor Steve Costigan. But be cautious with this one because I went and looked at some of them and I was thinking, maybe I could recommend this one. And then I'd sort of read about 2 paragraphs in and go, no, maybe not this one. And I have a feeling that might go for every single one I read. Let's just say it has some quite reductive views of anyone who isn't a white Protestant American.
I was about to say, there's that. Yeah.
And a man.
Yeah. Product of their time. I'm actually reading Robert E. Howard Conan stories for the first time, right now, as we're recording this. I'm in the middle of one of the collections. Oh, boy.
Yeah, that's because some of them are really good. I remember the first time I read those.
Some of them are pretty good. Yeah.
And I was thinking, what's the problem with this? Doesn't seem that bad. And then I started the next one. And I was like, oh, okay.
I'll tell you what, you could, I will say that you could devise the most deadly drinking game ever if it was drink every time Conan is compared to a cat.
A cat of some kind, yeah.
A cat of some kind, a bronze statue, or his blue eyes are mentioned. You'd be dead inside of 4 pages. Yeah, anyway, okay. With all that said, listeners, Fear of a Black Dragon is a production of The Gauntlet. You can find The Gauntlet on Twitter at GauntletRPG. Our website is gauntlet-rpg.com, also brindlewoodbay.com. It's the same website. We have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/gauntlet. If you'd like to support the show financially, we love that. Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks, as ever, to our untouchable editor, Rich Rogers. And thank you, listeners, for listening. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody. an NPC who believes all gingers are fire elementals who long to be set aflame. Let's go to the expert delve. It's pretty good, right?
I mean, yeah, like you can't. I don't know what you're complaining about, man.
I know.